when applause was never the goal. Some leaders are shaped by recognition, others are undone by it, but a rare few build their entire path around a quieter intention, to act without ever expecting to be seen. This story begins where applause was available, visible, and easily claimed, yet deliberately ignored. This moment matters today because success has become inseparable from validation. We measure impact by reaction, leadership by visibility, and worth by attention. But beneath that noise exists another model, one where influence is designed to function, even if no one ever notices who built it. From the start, he understood something most never do. Applause changes incentives. Once praise enters the system, behavior begins bending toward it. Decisions shift subtly, serving perception rather than outcome. Leadership turned performative long before it turns ineffective. So he made a quiet choice. He would never build for applause. When initiative succeeded, he redirected attention outward. When stability held, he resisted credit. When outcomes impress observers, he remained absent from the narrative, not out of humility, but out of discipline. He wanted systems that survived without reinforcement, authority that did not depend on affirmation. The reveal came over time. People stopped looking upward for validation. Teams acted without waiting to be seen. Decisions were justified by consequence, not reception. Praise, no longer centralized, lost its power to distort judgment. What replaced it was responsibility. Some misread this absence. They assumed disengagement. Others suspected calculation. A few believed influence was fading. But quietly, something stronger was forming. A culture where action mattered more than recognition. Where success did not demand ownership. Where leadership was felt, not celebrated. He watched this carefully. Because building without applause is not passive. It requires restraint when recognition is offered. Silence when praise is deserved. Distance when celebration would be easiest. Each refusal reinforces the system or weakens it. As years passed, the absence of applause became a feature. People stopped expecting it. The work itself became the reward. Alignment replaced affirmation. And the system began functioning with a maturity rarely seen. That was when the final truth emerged. When applause is never the goal, leadership becomes free. Free from reaction. Free from expectation, free to endure, and that freedom would soon be tested. Because when the world finally notices what you built, the temptation to accept recognition is strongest then, and how he responded would determine whether this quiet path could survive its final challenge. When attention finally arrived, it did not come as praise at first. It came as curiosity. External observers began noticing outcomes without understanding their origin. Stability without spectacle, coordination without command, success without a visible architect. Questions followed. Who was driving this? Where was the center of control? Why did nothing seem to revolve around a single figure? In a world trained to locate authority in faces and voices, the absence felt unnatural. Inside the system, the pressure changed tone. Advisors suggested it might be time to step forward. Not for ego, they said, but for clarity. Recognition could protect the work. Visibility could prevent misinterpretation. If people did not know who led, they might assume no one did. He understood the argument. Silence works best when no one is looking for a speaker. Once attention gathers, absence can be mistaken for avoidance. And avoidance, when misunderstood, invites others to fill the space. The conflict sharpened when an external narrative began forming. Commentators credited outcomes to chance. Others attributed success to temporary conditions. A few suggested the system lacked leadership entirely. None of these explanations were accurate, but accuracy mattered less than repetition. The temptation surfaced clearly. Step forward, accept recognition, and correct the story, or remain absent and allow misunderstanding to persist. He hesitated, not from doubt, but from discipline. Accepting recognition now would change the internal culture instantly. Praise would centralize. Expectations would shift upward. Decisions would begin orbiting perception rather than principle. The system would survive, but it would not be the same system. So he chose restraint again. He clarified internally, not externally. He reinforced standards quietly. He reminded leaders why alignment mattered more than credit. The work continued without narrative correction. The result was uncomfortable. Externally, confusion lingered. Internally, confidence was tested. Could belief in the system endure without public affirmation? Could leadership remain credible without being named? The answer emerged slowly. As outcomes continued holding, explanation became less urgent. Results spoke without attribution. Those closest to the work stopped caring how it was framed. They trusted what they could feel functioning around them. The system did not need applause to survive attention. It needed consistency. And as the noise outside searched for a story that never arrived, something deeper took hold inside. Pride shifted from recognition to reliability. That shift would matter soon. Because attention, once awakened, does not disappear easily. It escalates. And the next phase would test whether a system built without applause could withstand a moment when recognition was no longer optional, but demanded. The demand arrived disguised as opportunity. A global forum extended an invitation. High profile, visible, impossible to ignore. The stage was large. The audience influential. Recognition would be immediate. Participation would cement authority in the public imagination. This was a conflict brought fully into the open. Declining the invitation would raise questions. Accepting it would rewrite the culture he had spent years shaping. The moment offered validation, but at a cost rarely acknowledged. Applause, once accepted, does not remain external. It seeps inward, reshaping incentives, expectations, and behavior. Advisors framed the choice as strategic. Visibility could protect the system from misinterpretation. A public figurehead could stabilize narrative. Silence, they warned, might allow others to claim ownership of outcomes they did not build. He considered it carefully, because the temptation was real. Not ego, but responsibility. If recognition could safeguard what had been built, was refusal still discipline or stubbornness? The question pressed hard. This was not about comfort. It was about consequence. He examined the system honestly. Would it fracture if he remained unseen? Would alignment weaken if applause entered? The answer came not from theory, but from observation. Leaders continued acting with clarity. Decisions held under pressure. No one waited for permission. The work moved forward without needing to be represented. That was a turning point. The system no longer needed him to be visible. So he declined, quietly, respectfully, without explanation. The reaction was immediate confusion. Analysts speculated. Narratives filled the absence. Some interpreted the refusal as avoidance, others as arrogance. None understood the reason. Inside the system, something profound happened. Nothing changed. No hesitation. No uncertainty. No loss of confidence. The culture held. Authority remained distributed. Pride stayed local. Applause, denied entry, failed to distort behavior. That was the proof. A system built without recognition could survive the moment recognition was offered. Yet the pressure had not fully passed. Because refusing applause once does not silence it forever. The final test would come when recognition was no longer optional, when visibility arrived not as invitation, but as inevitability. And how he would respond then would define whether this path could endure to its very end. Visibility arrived without permission. Success had grown too consistent to remain unnoticed. Others began pointing toward the system, searching for its source, its face, its story. Recognition was no longer an invitation. It was pressure. This was the final climax. He could no longer remain invisible without explanation. Silence now risked being misinterpreted as evasion, secrecy, or manipulation. The world wanted a figure to credit, to question, to elevate. Applause stood ready, waiting to reshape everything it touched. He chose a final restraint. He did not step forward alone. Instead, he allowed the system to be seen, not through a single voice, but through many. Leaders spoke for their work. Institutions explained their processes. Outcomes were attributed to standards, not personalities. The architecture was visible, but the architect remained absent. That choice preserved everything. Recognition diffused instead of concentrating. Applause lost its ability to distort because it had no single target. Authority remained distributed. Pride stayed grounded in contribution, not proximity to power. The resolution unfolded with quiet finality. The world moved on, satisfied with partial answers. Narratives formed without heroes. And inside the system, nothing shifted. The culture remained intact because it had never depended on being recognized to function. Standing apart, he accepted what this path required, to build something meaningful, and then refuse ownership of it, to shape the future, and then disappear from its story. That was the ultimate lesson. When applause is never the goal, leadership becomes timeless, not because it is remembered, but because it is unnecessary to remember at all. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. When a